My new neighbor started parking her RV on my driveway every night, and when I put up no parking signs, she got the city involved. Then the inspector found her real crime. I'm Kara, I'm 33, I live with my husband Mason. We bought our first house a few months ago, and it's one of those normal quiet streets where the biggest excitement should be a barking dog or someone's holiday lights staying up too long, not a stranger treating your driveway like a free storage lot. The first night it happened, I genuinely thought I was half asleep. Because who does that? Who pulls an RV onto someone else's property in the middle of the night and parks it like it's routine? The camera caught everything, the reverse lights, the little adjustment forward, the way the driver took their time lining it up so the RV was perfectly straight, half blocking our garage door and fully blocking the side gate. Then the driver got out and walked away like she was returning to her own home. The next morning I walked outside and just stared at it, because when you see an RV sitting on your driveway you can't pretend you misread a curb. It was literally on our concrete, behind the line, on our side of the sidewalk. I knocked on the door of the house next to ours, and that's when I met Janine. Janine is in her mid-40s, always in athleisure, always carrying a big insulated cup, the kind of person who speaks in that confident customer service voice, even when she's doing something completely unreasonable. She opened the door like she expected me, and before I could even introduce myself, she smiled and said, "Oh, hi. You must be the new owner. I'm Janine. I'm just going to be parking my RV on your driveway at night for a while. It's safer there. My curb is tight." I blinked at her, because my brain was still trying to find a polite version of what I wanted to say, which was, absolutely not. I told her no, that's my property, and she laughed lightly like I was kidding. Then she waved her hand and said, "It's only overnight. I'm gone by morning. You won't even notice." I told her I did notice, that it blocked my garage and my gate, and Janine said she would be careful, like the issue was her driving skill, not her entitlement. Mason came outside, because he heard my voice, and he looked at the RV, then at Janine, then back at me, and I could see him doing that silent calculation of how to set a boundary without escalating into a screaming match with someone we just met. Mason told her plainly that she cannot park on our driveway, and Janine's smile tightened. She said she thought neighbors were supposed to help each other. She said her cousin always lets her do it at her old neighborhood. She said she is storing it temporarily because her other spot fell through. And she said it like we were inconveniencing her by having a driveway we intended to use. Mason asked her why she even needed it on our driveway specifically, and Janine shrugged and said, "Because it fits, and because I can see it from my window." I told her she needed to move it immediately, and she made a face like she was being humiliated in front of an audience. Then she said, fine, I'll move it right now," and she climbed into the cab and backed it off our driveway with exaggerated caution. I thought that was the end, because normal people hear no and stop. That night, the driveway lights came on again. The next morning, the RV was back, and this time it was parked even deeper onto our concrete, like she wanted to make a point. I walked over again, this time recording on my phone because I was already getting that uneasy feeling that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a power game. Janine answered the door with the same tight smile, and she said she was hopping we wouldn't make it a big thing. I told her she is trespassing, and she waved that away and said it's not trespassing if it's just parking. Then she said we're on a public street, and she can park where she wants. I told her it wasn't the street, it was my driveway, and she stared at me like I was the one struggling with reality. Then she said, "It's basically the same, it's all just pavement." Mason came over with me, and he told her if the RV was on our property again, we would have it towed, and Janine's eyes narrowed, and she said, "You can't tow my property, that's illegal," and she said it with such confidence that for a second I wondered if she believed her own words. Mason told her it's illegal for her to park it on our property, and Janine snapped that she would call the city, and then she slammed the door. I went back inside feeling shaky, not because I was scared of her physically, but because I could feel that familiar dread of dealing with someone who's not operating on shared rules, someone who will keep escalating until you get tired. That night I barely slept, because every time the driveway light flicked on I checked the camera, and sure enough around 1:45, Janine backed the RV onto our driveway again, turned off the cab lights, and walked back to her house like she was coming home from a late errand. The next morning, I called a towing company because I wanted to know the reality before I threatened again, and they asked if there were posted signs, if I had proof it was private property, and they said they could tow from private property with authorization, but some companies prefer signage to avoid conflict, and I asked what kind of signage, and they told me a basic no parking private driveway sign was enough. So I did that. I bought 2 no parking private driveway signs. I put one at the edge near the sidewalk and one near the garage, and I also put a small camera sign near the gate because the driveway camera is obvious, but I wanted zero plausible deniability. That evening, Janine walked over while I was watering plants. She stared at the signs, then she stared at me, and she said, "Wow, that's hostile." I told her it's a boundary, and Janine said she feels threatened, and she said she thought we were going to be good neighbors, and she added that she had already contacted the city about our signs because you can't just put up random signs. I told her they're on my property, and Janine said it still has to comply with city code, and she said it with the same tone people use when they say they know the manager. Mason came outside and asked if there was a problem, and Janine's posture changed immediately. She got softer with him, like she decided he was the one to negotiate with, and she told him she just needed one little favor until she found a proper place for her RV, and that she would even pay us. Mason asked her how long, and Janine said she wasn't sure, maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month, and she said it casually like that was a normal request to make of strangers. Mason told her no, and Janine's face hardened again, and she said, "You're going to regret being difficult because I know how these things work," and then she walked away. That night, the RV did not show up. I started to relax, and then at around 2:15, the driveway light flicked on, and the camera showed the RV backing in slowly. And the most absurd part is she backed right past the no parking sign like it was decorative. I took screenshots from the camera feed, I saved the clip, and I called the towing company in the morning. The dispatcher asked if the vehicle was there now. I said yes, and I said I have camera footage of it entering overnight, and the dispatcher said okay, we can send someone, and she asked for the make and plate number, and when I walked outside to get the plate number, it was covered. Not accidentally obscured, covered, like someone draped a cloth over it. My skin went cold, because it meant she knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew why a covered plate matters. I pulled the cloth off and took a photo of the plate, and I noticed something else while I was standing near the rear, the smell. It wasn't gasoline, it wasn't normal exhaust, it was that sour chemical sewage smell you sometimes catch near storm drains after heat, and it was faint but there, and I told myself it was probably just the RV being old, but the smell stuck in my brain like a warning. The tow truck arrived an hour later, and the driver looked at the RV and asked if it was operable, and I told him yes. It drives in nightly, and he nodded and started setting up. Janine burst out of her front door like she had been watching for the tow truck. She ran over waving her arms, and she started yelling that we are stealing her RV, that we are harassing her, that we are bullies. The tow driver stayed calm and told her it was a private property tow authorized by the property owner, and Janine snapped that she has a permit. Then she said we agreed. Then she said we were extorting her. And she kept shifting the story depending on what seemed most effective. Mason came out and told Janine to step back, and Janine pointed at our signs and said those are illegal, and that she already reported us, and that the city will handle us. The tow driver asked Janine if she had proof. The RV had permission to be there, and Janine said she didn't need proof because it's common sense, and she tried to stand between the driver and the hitch. The driver told her if she interfered, he would call law enforcement, and Janine stepped back just enough to keep yelling without technically touching the equipment. Then Janine said something that made my stomach flip again. She said, "You can't tow it. Someone is inside." I stared at her, because if someone was inside, my first thought wasn't sympathy, it was fear, because that meant she had potentially been using my driveway as a place to shelter someone without my knowledge. The tow driver stopped and told her if someone is inside, that changes things, and he asked her who was inside, and Janine looked caught. Then she said no one is inside. She meant someone could be inside. She just wanted to make sure we understood the seriousness. So she lied again, but she lied in a way that revealed she was willing to use any lever, even the idea of someone being inside a vehicle on my property. The tow driver resumed hooking up, and at that point, Janine started screaming that she was calling the police. I told her to call, because I wanted a report. I wanted a paper trail that said she parked on my driveway without permission. She called, and a police officer showed up about 20 minutes later, and by the time he arrived, Janine had switched into crying mode, wiping her eyes, saying she's being targeted, saying she's a single woman and she feels unsafe with aggressive neighbors. The officer asked what was happening, and Mason calmly explained. He said Janine has parked her RV on our private driveway repeatedly despite being told no. We posted no parking signs, we have camera footage, and we called for a private property tow. Janine tried to interrupt, claiming the driveway is public access, and the officer looked at the property line, looked at the sidewalk, looked at where the RV was positioned, and told her it was clearly on our private property. Then the officer asked Janine why she was parking there, and Janine said her curb space is too narrow, and the officer asked why she did it at night, and Janine said she doesn't want to bother traffic, and the officer asked why her license plate was covered, and Janine said it was to protect it from sun damage. Even the officer paused at that one. Then he asked her to remove the cover and keep it uncovered, and Janine's eyes flashed with anger for a second before she pasted her sad face back on. The officer told her she needed to let the tow proceed, and he also warned her that repeated trespass could lead to further action, and Janine looked like she wanted to explode, but she stepped back. The tow driver hauled the RV away, and Janine stood in my driveway staring at the empty concrete like she wanted to imprint it into her memory. Then she turned and walked back to her house without a word. I thought that would be the end, because her RV was gone. Instead, it was the beginning of a new kind of nonsense. 2 days later, I got a notice on my door from the city code enforcement. It said a complaint had been filed about unpermitted signage and obstruction of the public right-of-way, and it listed a date and time for an inspection. And my first reaction was anger, because she lost the driveway battle, so she tried to weaponize the city. But my second reaction was nerves, because I'm a rule follower, and the idea of a city inspection makes my stomach twist even when I know I'm fine. I called the number on the notice, and the person on the phone sounded tired, and she told me someone complained that my signs were confusing drivers and could be mistaken for official signage. And I told her they were on my property, simple private no parking signs, and she said an inspector would still come out to verify placement and compliance. So I waited. The night before the scheduled inspection, the driveway light flicked on again, and my heart sank, and then I watched the camera feed and saw Janine's RV back. She had retrieved it from impound, and she parked it right back on my driveway again. This time she backed in earlier, around 11:30, like she wanted me to see it, and she left the plate uncovered, like she was trying to look lawful, and she walked over to her front door and looked straight at my camera. Mason and I went outside immediately, and Janine came out as if she had been waiting, and she told us she is allowed to park there until the city decides, because she filed a complaint and now it's under review. I told her the city doesn't decide private property use, and Janine said you'll see tomorrow, and she smiled like she knew something we didn't. We called the tow company again, but they said because the vehicle had already been towed once, and there was now an active dispute, they wanted confirmation from law enforcement again to avoid being dragged into drama. So I called the non-emergency line, and the dispatcher said an officer could come, but it might be a while. So we waited, RV sitting on our driveway like a taunt, and while we waited I walked around it again, because now that it had returned, my brain kept circling that smell. The smell was stronger this time, and I noticed a damp patch near the edge of my driveway by the side gate. Not a puddle exactly, more like a darkened spot that looked like it had been wet recently, and then started to dry, and the smell was concentrated there, and I felt my stomach flip because my side gate leads to where our sewer cleanout cap is. The little white pipe with a threaded cap that the plumber told us never to touch unless there's an emergency. I walked over to the cleanout, and the cap looked slightly crooked, not fully off, but not seated properly either, and there were faint scuff marks on the concrete like something had been dragged or pressed there. My whole body went cold, because the only reason someone messes with a cleanout is if they're trying to access the sewer line. I took photos immediately, I recorded a short video, and I told Mason, and Mason's face changed in a way I will never forget. That focused rage that comes from realizing someone didn't just inconvenience you, they crossed into something disgusting and dangerous. The officer arrived about 40 minutes later, and by then Janine had retreated inside her house, leaving the RV like a silent argument sitting between us. The officer listened to our explanation, confirmed the RV was on private property, and told us we could have it towed again. Then he asked why we looked so shaken beyond the parking issue, and I pointed to the cleanout cap. I told him I think she has been connecting her RV to my sewer line, and the officer's expression went from mild annoyance to alert, because now it was not just a parking dispute, it was potential property damage and illegal dumping. He walked over, looked at the cap, and he asked if I had proof, and I told him I had camera footage of the RV entering at night, and I had photos of the cap and the wet area. But I didn't have footage of her physically connecting anything, because my camera angle doesn't cover the side gate area fully. The officer asked if we had smelled anything before, and I told him yes, faintly, and he nodded. Then he went to Janine's door and knocked. Janine answered with that tight smile again, and the officer told her she needed to move the RV immediately, or it would be towed. And Janine snapped that she's waiting for the inspector tomorrow, and the officer told her the inspector doesn't override private property rights, and she needed to remove it tonight. Janine got loud, then she got teary, then she started accusing us of making things up. And then the officer asked her directly if she had connected her RV to our sewer cleanout. Janine's face flickered, just a flicker, then she laughed and said absolutely not, and she asked why she would even do that, and the officer said because the cleanout cap looks disturbed and there's sewage odor. Janine's eyes narrowed, and she said maybe your house has a plumbing problem, and she said it smugly like she thought she found the perfect counterattack. The officer told her to move the RV now, and Janine stormed into the RV cab and backed it off our driveway and onto the street, not neatly this time. She bumped the curb hard enough that the whole RV rocked. Then she got out and slammed the door. We had it towed from the street the next morning because it was partially blocking a fire hydrant, which I did not even notice until the tow driver pointed it out, and that felt like karma wearing a reflective vest. Then the inspector came. His name was Victor. He wore a city badge and carried a tablet, and he walked up my driveway looking like someone who has seen every version of neighbor drama imaginable. I explained the signs, the trespass, the towing, and I showed him where the signs were placed, clearly inside my property line, not mimicking official signage, just basic private property warnings, and Victor nodded and said the signs were fine. And he asked me who filed the complaint, and I told him Janine, and Victor made a small sound like that explained everything. Then Victor asked why the complaint mentioned obstruction, and I told him it was retaliation, and Victor said he still had to document what he saw, and he started taking photos. While he was doing that, Janine came outside like she couldn't help herself, and she immediately started telling Victor that we are hostile, that we're putting up illegal signs, that we're harassing her, and that she has been parking her RV safely and we keep trying to steal it. Victor listened without reacting. Then he asked her where the RV was, and Janine pointed down the street, and Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, and he asked why she was parking an RV on a residential street overnight, and Janine said she has every right. Victor asked if the RV was registered and insured, and Janine snapped that it's none of his business. And Victor said it became his business when she involved the city. And when a complaint turns into a site visit, the site visit can expand if other issues become visible. Janine's face tightened, and she said the real issue is our driveway. And Victor said he already confirmed the driveway is private and her RV cannot be there without permission. And he told her bluntly that she created her own problem by parking on someone else's property. Janine's eyes flashed. Then she pointed at my side gate and said maybe tell them to fix their disgusting plumbing, because it smells, and she said it loudly like she wanted Victor to hear it, like she was trying to get ahead of whatever he might find. Victor paused, looked at me, and asked what she meant, and I told him about the sewer cleanout cap and the smell and the wet spot and my suspicion that the RV had been hooked up, and I showed him the photos. Victor's whole posture changed, and he walked toward the side gate area, and he knelt near the cleanout, and he asked if he could inspect it. And I said yes, please, and he put on gloves, unscrewed the cap carefully, looked inside, and then he stood up and said quietly that the threads were scraped, like someone had repeatedly opened and closed it. He asked if we had opened it recently, and I told him no, never, and Victor nodded. Then he walked over to the street where the RV had been towed from, and he looked at the ground near where it had sat, and he pointed out faint marks that looked like a hose had been dragged across the pavement toward my driveway before. Victor asked Janine if she had been dumping gray water or black water, and Janine exploded. She started shouting that he was accusing her of crimes. She said she would report him. She said he was biased. She said we were lying. Victor stayed calm and told her he was going to request a sanitation investigation and that he needed to see the RV if it was still in the area. And Janine said it was none of his business because it was on the street. And Victor told her again that she brought the city into it, and now the city can look at what the city cares about. Then Victor asked Janine one simple question that made the air shift. He asked her where she had been emptying her RV tanks. Janine started talking fast about proper facilities and camping trips and how she's responsible, but she didn't answer the question with a place, a date, a receipt, anything concrete, and Victor asked again, where? Janine snapped that she doesn't have to answer, and Victor said she didn't have to answer him, but the city could answer it through investigation, and he told her he was documenting a suspected illegal discharge. Janine's face went pale, and for a second her mask slipped, and I saw something like fear, not fear of us, fear of accountability. Victor told me he would follow up, and he advised me to keep the camera footage, keep the photos, and if I noticed any further tampering, call immediately, and he also told me to consider installing a locking cap on the cleanout, because unfortunately this kind of thing happens when people have RVs and no proper dump access. Janine stood on her porch watching the whole time like she was trying to calculate her next move, and I went inside feeling like my house had been violated in a way I couldn't fully articulate, because it's one thing to have someone park on your driveway. It's another thing to realize they may have been using your sewer line in secret. That night I didn't sleep at all, because my brain kept replaying the damp spot, and the smell, and the idea that someone was dumping waste onto my property like it was nothing. Update, 4 weeks later. Janine did not get calmer after the city inspector visit. She got nastier, because the moment someone with authority questioned her, she decided we were enemies, not neighbors. She started doing little retaliations that were designed to be deniable. She would roll her trash bins into the very edge of our driveway line, not fully on it, just enough to force me to maneuver. She started leaving her car half-angled so it blocked the sight line when I backed out. She started blasting music in her front yard on weekend mornings, and every time I stepped outside she would stare like she was waiting for me to react, so she could say I was harassing her. I tried to ignore her, because I didn't want a public argument. I wanted documentation and quiet boundaries. We installed a locking cleanout cap. The plumber showed me the scrape marks and said it looked like repeated use. And he also said if someone connected a hose and dumped into it improperly, it could introduce debris or overload the line. And he recommended a camera inspection of our sewer line just to be safe, which cost money I did not want to spend. But the idea of hidden damage made my skin itch. The sewer camera inspection showed the line itself was intact, but the plumber found evidence of repeated discharge events in the form of residue and certain scuff patterns around the cleanout junction, and he said it was consistent with someone frequently opening it and discharging waste, and he wrote it up in a simple report for us. Not dramatic, just factual, which mattered because factual is what holds up when someone tries to call you paranoid. Victor from the city called me and asked if I could email my camera footage and photos, and I did. And then he told me sanitation and code enforcement had opened a case, and that he could not tell me everything, but he said my suspicion was not unreasonable. And that was the first time I felt like someone in the system was taking this seriously. 2 days later, an officer knocked on my door, different from the first one, and he asked if we were the homeowners who reported suspected illegal dumping tied to an RV, and I said yes. And he asked if the RV was still in the neighborhood, and I told him it was currently not visible, because after the second tow, Janine started parking it farther away, but it would show up some nights on the street a block over. The officer asked if we had the license plate number, and I gave it to him, and he looked at his phone. Then he looked up and asked me how long we had been dealing with this, and I told him the timeline, and his face tightened, because he said the plate number didn't match the RV description in the system, and that could mean a clerical error or it could mean something worse. That comment made my stomach drop, because suddenly the phrase real crime didn't feel like a dramatic idea. It felt like a door opening into something bigger. That night around midnight, I saw flashing lights down the street through our bedroom window, and Mason and I checked the camera feed, and we saw multiple vehicles, police, and what looked like a city utility truck, stopped near the corner. I watched the live feed like I couldn't look away, and then I saw Janine's RV, not on my driveway, on the street down the block. And I saw 2 officers standing near the cab and another person in a reflective vest shining a light along the side. Janine came out of her house in a robe, walking fast, and even from the camera distance I could see her body language, angry and panicked at the same time, and she started gesturing, and she kept trying to get close to the RV, and an officer held up a hand to keep her back. They opened the RV door, and the light inside flicked on, and then something happened that made my skin crawl. Someone came out, not Janine, a man, and he looked disoriented, like he had been sleeping, and he stepped onto the street and looked around like he wasn't sure where he was. Mason whispered that someone really had been inside it, and I felt that cold, sick feeling again, because it meant the RV wasn't just storage, it was being used. The officers spoke to the man, then to Janine, then they went back inside the RV, and after a few minutes they pulled out a thick hose, the kind used for RV sewer discharge, and they held it up like it was evidence, and Janine started yelling louder, and she tried to grab it, and an officer stepped between her and the hose. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the shape of the situation. This wasn't a simple traffic stop. This was an investigation catching up to her. The next morning, Victor called me and told me the sanitation team had followed up on reports of illegal discharge in the area, and they had tracked it using a combination of witness reports, city camera footage from an intersection, and our documentation, and they located the RV, and when they inspected it, they found a hidden discharge setup and evidence of repeated dumping. He also told me the plate issue was not a clerical error. The RV had mismatched plates, and when police checked the VIN, it came back as reported stolen in another county months earlier. I sat down at my kitchen table and just stared, because my brain was trying to reconcile my annoying neighbor drama with the word stolen. Victor told me that once a vehicle is flagged as stolen, the situation becomes law enforcement, and the city's role is secondary. But he said he could confirm one thing. The inspector found her real crime, and it was not the no parking signs. It was illegal waste discharge and possession of a stolen vehicle. And he said it in that calm, bureaucratic voice that somehow made it feel even more surreal. Later that day, an officer came back and asked if we would provide a formal statement about the repeated trespass and the suspected sewer use. And I did, and I gave them everything. The camera clips, the photos, the plumber report, the tow receipts, and the code enforcement notice. And the officer told me that the cleanout tampering matters because it shows pattern and intent, not just a one-time accident. Janine didn't come to my door after that, and for the first time since she moved in, her house was quiet, curtains drawn, no trash bin games, no staring on the porch. 2 days later, I saw a flatbed tow truck and 2 police vehicles outside her house, and they removed the RV again, and this time it wasn't an impound dispute, it was evidence. And I watched them open compartments and take photos and label items, and I felt a strange mix of relief and nausea because I wanted the problem gone, but I didn't want my street to become a crime scene. That night, Mason and I sat on the couch and realized we had been living next to someone who was bold enough to use our driveway, bold enough to tamper with our sewer cleanout, and bold enough to call the city on us, all while sitting on a stolen RV, and my brain kept circling the same thought. People who act that entitled often have something bigger they're hiding. Janine's retaliation shifted after that into something quieter. She started telling neighbors we were snitches. She started saying we targeted her because she was new. She started implying we were the reason her life was falling apart. And a couple neighbors gave us that cautious look for a while, like they didn't know who to believe. But then the city posted a notice about illegal discharge investigation on the block. Nothing nomming us, just a generic public notice. And suddenly people's faces changed. Because nobody wants sewage dumped near their homes, and nobody wants a stolen vehicle parked on their street, and Janine's story started losing oxygen. Still, I kept feeling uneasy, because I knew there was more coming, court, hearings, something, and I didn't want loose ends where she could return and start again. Final update, 6 months later. Janine is gone, and I don't mean her RV is gone. I mean Janine is no longer living next door. The house has a for lease sign now, and for the first time since we moved in, I can walk to my mailbox without scanning for a confrontation. Here, what happened in the months after the inspector visit and the stolen RV discovery, and why it ended the way it did. After the RV was seized, Janine tried one last intimidation tactic. She left a handwritten note in our mailbox accusing us of ruining her life and saying we would pay for it. And that note was the last time she attempted direct contact, because Mason took it straight to the police station and added it to our report. And the officer told us to stop engaging and keep documenting. And he also suggested we install a motion light focused specifically on the side gate area, which we did. The case moved slowly, because everything moves slowly when paperwork and agencies are involved. But the important parts did happen. Sanitation cited her for illegal discharge. The city required remediation steps, and we were advised to have our cleanout area disinfected and the surrounding soil near the edge of the driveway treated, because there was evidence of spillage, not just discharge into the line, and that was one of the most disgusting phone calls I've ever had to make. Calling a service and trying to sound normal while asking how to clean up after someone else's waste. We paid for the cleanup initially because we wanted it done immediately. Then our attorney, yes, we ended up consulting one, helped us submit a restitution claim through the criminal case process. And we were told not to expect a fast payout, but that the documentation mattered, and it did. The stolen RV turned out to be connected to something even uglier than I expected. Janine's boyfriend, the man who stepped out of the RV that night, had prior warrants, and the RV had been reported stolen by a small business owner who rented it out, and the plates were from a different vehicle. And the officers told us that mismatched plates often get used to avoid detection, which made my skin crawl because it meant she wasn't just careless, she was deliberate. Janine tried to claim she didn't know it was stolen. She tried to paint herself as tricked. But the investigation found she had been using it as a nightly living space when her boyfriend fought with her. And she had been dumping waste wherever she could because proper dump sites cost money and require planning. And her version of planning was using my driveway and my cleanout because it was convenient and hidden from the street. The reason she kept choosing my driveway and not any other neighbor finally made sense when one of the officers said our side gate and cleanout placement made it easy to access without being seen from most angles, and I felt sick hearing that, because it meant she didn't just stumble into our property, she evaluated it. In the end, Janine accepted a plea deal related to the stolen RV case, and the illegal dumping citations were tied into it as part of the resolution. I'm not going to pretend I fully understand every legal term, but I do understand the outcome. She was ordered to pay restitution for documented damages and cleanup. She was prohibited from contacting us, and she moved out quickly afterward. Likely because living next door to the people who now had a thick file on her behavior was no longer comfortable. We did receive restitution eventually, not all at once, and not in a satisfying, dramatic way. It came in chunks through the system, but it covered the clean-out repairs, the cleanup, and some of the legal consult costs. And that mattered because it was the only acknowledgement that our home was harmed, not just our patients. The city closed the code case on our signs with no action, which still makes me laugh bitterly when I think about it, because she tried to weaponize an inspector against us, and instead she handed the city a reason to look closer at her. The The neighborhood vibe is slowly normal again. People stopped whispering. One neighbor even apologized for believing Janine's version early on, and another neighbor told us quietly that Janine had tried to park the RV in front of their house first, but they confronted her immediately, and she backed off. And it made me realize she chose us because we were new and still trying to be polite. If I could go back, I would have been less polite sooner. Not mean, just firm without any negotiation tone. Because people like Janine treat negotiation as weakness, and they treat kindness as an opening. Now our driveway is just a driveway again. The side gate locks. The clean-out cap locks. The camera covers the blind spot. And the driveway light finally stays off at night unless a raccoon wanders by. And I did not realize how much peace is built out of such small, ordinary things until someone tried to take them.